Hello and welcome to our first session of The Insider, our new quarterly webcasts in which we discuss the latest important issues to advertisers. We kick off today with a really interesting session in which Sir Martin Sorrell, the CEO of WPP, our parent company, will be addressing the next 5 years in marketing, alongside our very own Head of Strategy in Europe, Matthew Mee. The session's going to be moderated by Charlie Crowe, the founder of C Squared. C Squared, amongst many things, publish magazines such as Media and Marketing and also host events such as the Media Festival in Valencia. Shortly, they will also be launching their new festival for the LATAM region in Miami later in October. Before we start, I'd like to thank Sir Martin, Charlie and Matt for taking part in this webcast. Secondly, I'd like to thank all of you for watching. I know we have thousands of people watching all across the world, from Mexico to Italy, from the US to Singapore, and it's a real pleasure to have you here with us. I hope you're going to find the session interesting, and please feel free to challenge the team using the chat function on your screen. Today's topic is really important, the future. And as George Burns said, and I couldn't put it better, I look to the future because that's where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Charlie, to Martin and to Matt to take it from there.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and I can't let you go without congratulating you and MediaCom for winning the M&M Awards this year, second time in a row, and for your success at the Festival of Media Awards. So well done.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Here.
Welcome everybody to this fantastic concept and idea called the MediaCom Insider. It's my great honour to be able to present and moderate the very first one, and what a little show it's going to be.
A little show.
A little show.
Oh,
now, by way of an introduction, I first met Sir Martin Sorrell about 14 years ago when I was a very green young journalist on M&M magazine.
Still are, Charlie.
And I still am quite green. And I phoned up Martin and said, can I do an interview with you? And before I was able to ask any further questions on the phone, he challenged me to come up with his share price.
I don't recall this story at all.
He doesn't
Charlie,
remember it, but I swear to you it's true. And I felt at the time that was a rite of passage. And had I not got that question right, I probably wouldn't have interviewed him at all during my career as a journalist. So see, here we are. I must have got it right, and it's 721 pence
the journalist
today.
With a magnificent memory.
Is it not?
Well done.
So I hope we're going to have a fantastic session. The topic is particularly challenging, the next 5 years and how not to be taken by surprise much. And to help us on our way, I will be introducing later on in our discussion Matthew Mee, who's the Head of Strategy and Freshness at MediaCom EMEA, who will be giving us some insights into how some of the macro trends that we'll be discussing can be turned into actual micro strategies for MediaCom and its clients and its prospects and advertisers in general who are all tuning in. So, without further ado, sit back, relax. If you're in Europe or America, make sure you don't spill all your late breakfasts or late lunches all over your keyboards. If you're in Asia right now, then I hope you're not watching this to help aid a restful sleep, and that this is a fun thing to see perhaps before you go onto the bar for a little nightcap. So without further ado, let's crack on. Sir Martin.
I have difficulty in figuring out the next 5 minutes, let alone the next 5 years.
What's going to happen over the next 5 minutes?
Right.
So to ease us in gently to this topic, how not to be taken by surprise for the next 5 years, I thought it would be useful for us to think back a little bit and think about 5 years ago.
Right.
Back to 2005.
Right.
Okay. This was before WPP Group had bought Grey.
Right.
So MediaCom was not within your portfolio. TNS, 24/7, Icon Mobile, all those things had not happened.
Right.
Facebook was 1 year old.
Yeah.
Google
was about 5 years old.
5 years old and it hadn't yet become a verb.
8 years old, yes.
So if you think back to that moment in time, what in the last 5 years has taken you by surprise?
Oh dear. Well, you get taken. In all honesty, you get taken by surprise, Charlie, every day. You get surprised by these sessions, and I've got to congratulate Stephen, Matthew, and everybody at MediaCom on what I think is even Charlie,
Even
on what is a very interesting initiative and something we should do more of, and more regularly. And I'm sure it's going to be done regularly, as Matthew indicated, every quarter or so, but maybe even more than that. Now, as to what I think you get continually surprised. But if I, just think about your question, actually, I think back sort of 5 or 6 years ago, and so, somebody asked me when we first got interested in China, and we do this turgid annual report every year, which when my mother was alive, she was the only person in the world that read it. I think she still reads it from above, but and still the only person who reads it. But we went back and we looked. In 1993 was the first year that we sort of singled out China as, in the context of and this is pre-Jim O'Neill, because Jim O'Neill at Goldman Sachs, who really sort of generated the BRICS and Next 11 thesis or work, was really around 2000. So we started, and so thinking about your question, I still think that the three things that we hold near and dear to ourselves strategically, which are the new markets, the new geographic markets, so the BRICS and Next 11 really, Asia, Latin America, Africa, Middle East and Central Eastern Europe. Digital in all its forms, whether it be PC driven, whether it be mobile driven, video content driven, social network driven, whatever it is, that the second, so it's new markets, new media. And last but not least, consumer insight. I think probably the difference between now and let's say 5 years ago, particularly post Lehman, which was September the 13th or whatever it was, 2008, is that people are extremely focused on consumers and how consumers may or have not changed. But I would still see, what I call the NM squared CI, which is new media, new markets, and consumer insight. Those are still, I think, the critical issues. But consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds, so who knows?
Okay, and just going back specifically to the last 5 years, any particular one instance, the valuation of Facebook, pre-Microsoft investing perhaps, or a particular...
I actually think those are givens, because, the next, it's the next garage or the next couple of students or dropouts from Tsinghua University or Peking University as opposed to Harvard University. This week is the launch of the Facebook film, so we'll get our dose of that. I think, in that sense, it's almost a given. I actually think the most surprising thing about the recent is the sort of pressure in the system from clients, because in a low growth, low inflation world, which is likely to continue, cost pressures are considerable. And you're getting cost pressures in all sorts of different senses. There's the procurement pressure. Mm-hmm. There is the rise of big retail, whether it be Walmart yesterday, Massmart in South Africa, a bid. We've seen a change in management at Tesco and at Walmart to people who have run Michael Duke, Philip Harvey, who've run international businesses, so they're going to be thinking about retail in a much more global way than perhaps their predecessors have before. So I think that if you ask me what is the biggest sort of issue, it's not what you'd expect. Okay. It's not in a way. I think it's a continuation of what we've seen before. There's a shift in the balance of power. There is still significant overcapacity in most industries. There's a shortage of human capital, which you and I have discussed before, and our industry is not good at capturing that talent. There's the rise of the web. There's the importance of internal communications, such as the sort of stuff that we're doing here in external communications. There's the rise of retail, which I've touched on. The rise of government as a client. The importance of not just as interceding in the operation of the economy, but as a client.
Foreign direct investment, tourism,
absolutely,
sporting events, and so on.
There's businesses, clients becoming more global, but also being more local. There's no way that I, sitting here in Dublin or London or in New York, can know who the best people are, who are the multinational companies of the future, or where the best acquisitions are for WPP. We operate in 106, 107 countries. Our clients do too and more. So you have to have global and local. So those are some of the issues. CSR is another issue. I mean, a big difference between now and 2005 would be there is little or no greenwashing going on anymore. The clients are embracing in a genuine way. And I'm heavily involved with the World Economic Forum, and we did a survey of the 120 CEOs who form what's called the International Business Council. And what was really interesting was, they all said uncertainty is tremendously high at the moment. Their strategic response was emerging markets. I call it faster growing markets. They call it emerging markets. Their third issue was shortage of talent. Even though we've got high levels of unemployment, and particularly youth unemployment in most parts of the world, they said the big issue was talent. And the last thing was that green was still golden, which was interesting, because in a time when there's significant cost pressure. So I think those issues are pretty much the same.
As usual, you answer 100 questions.
Well, I'm trying. We only got 20 minutes, so I want to get the answers out. Yeah.
Let's see if we can just bring out a couple of those themes that you said. And one of them was the geographical changes that are taking place, seats of power. The BRICS in the next 11, as Goldman's termed them, roughly 27% of your revenues now?
27, 28,
where do you see that going in 5 years' time?
Well, we've been saying for a few years it should be a third, and I think it'll get there in 3 or 4 years' time. There's this wonderful thing called the civets now, which is Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, and South Africa, which is, Jim O'Neill gets very upset because 4 of the civets are in the next 11. But these countries are, I think, where you will see the future growth.
Which ones excite you most? Just out of interest.
Well, in a funny way, the BRICS I do love is a strong word, but I do love them all, actually. I think China, obviously, we have about a 15% share in China. We have a really exciting board meeting coming up the week after next in Shanghai. Our first WPP board meeting was in China in 1989 in Guangzhou. As I said in the annual report, we picked out China in 93. We take the board there. This is the WPP board, so not the MediaCom board or Group M or whatever it is. This is the whole thing, and we review our regional business. We've got about $3 billion of revenues in one way or another, including associates. That's companies we own 20 to 49% of in Asia. So we'll have a good look at that business. We've got a very exciting announcement coming in Shanghai, which more anon the appointment of a non-executive director of Chinese origin, and that's going to be very, very unusual for a Western company to do that. And very unusual. So we're very excited about that from the media industry.
Obviously, the Chinese issues is fascinating. From
so let me just finish. So China I love. I mean, India, very, very strong market share. They're almost half the market. Brazil, 25%. Russia, 25%. Or each of them, I don't think you can distinguish. Russia, people worry about more, but is just as exciting. With the oil price likely to be where it is, north of $100 over the foreseeable future. Russia, I'm very bullish on Russia, and as long as they use the infrastructure, the money they generate for investment in infrastructure, technology, and education, I think it's a fabulous opportunity.
If you take those 4 markets, you've got some interesting legislative and traditional barriers for growth. I would argue. For example, in China, you've got different codification of the laws.
Yes.
You've got a different relationship with Chinese businesses.
Yes.
In Russia, you've got a certain lack of transparency in media trading, and always concerns over things like airtime mintage and the involvement of politicians.
Corruption.
In Brazil, they don't allow media agencies to trade, which is a significant chunk of the way WPP
maybe a good idea. Who knows?
Makes its business. What would you like to see happen in these exciting BRIC markets in order to perhaps generate the opportunities that you see them?
The greatest thing about these places is that an Indian, won't say who it was, but one of the Indian, let me call them oligarchs, said to me a few years ago when I was in Mumbai. He said, "Do you think we should run together, holding hands, or run free?" And it took me about an hour to figure out what he was talking about, but eventually we got there. And what he meant was, in India, which is growing, let's say GDP growth is 8, 9%, 10% at the moment, should you join hands and work together? Because he had a diverse empire, and should his people work together and think about what they can do to leverage what they do, or should they just run free? And after about half an hour, I have worked this one out. My view, I said to him, look, if I was operating the business in the UK, where it's much slower growth, I think running holding hands makes much more sense than running free. Here, it doesn't matter, because, you're growing, our industry, if the GMP is growing at 8, 9 or 10%, in theory, we should be growing at about twice, because India is under-branded and under-marketed, and advertising as a proportion of GMP has got a long way to go. So this is what is really exciting about it. It's a bit like new media. Because it's growing, and I believe I'm pushing an open door. I do believe that people at MediaCom or Group M or WPP are more intelligent and able than the average. But let's assume that they're the average for a minute. Pushing on an open door is much more exciting and much more interesting than dealing with a slow growth Western Europe, which sadly, I think is going to be with us for some
Okay.
point in time, unless things change.
Right, and to come to that,
Yeah.
you've talked about the Western European markets being in something of a twilight zone at the moment with regards to the way the multinationals are spending and how they perceive marketing, and you've referred a lot
Yeah.
to Jeff Immelt's comments about the economy
Reset.
being reset.
Yeah.
What needs to be done to get Western European brands and businesses out of that twilight
Well,
zone
it's
mentality?
really interesting because at the moment, of course, if you looked at our first 8 months, well, you externally would be able to see the 6 months, but we just finished our review actually of the interstices of our 8 months, August results, and the irony about what we're talking about and what I've just said is that it's wrong. Well, not the irony. The humiliating fact is it's wrong.
America rebounding
because America,
extraordinary,
it bites back. And America's behaving like an emerging market. I mean, our revenues the first 8 months of the year are up in America by 7.2%. The average for the company is 3.6%. So it's twice the average, and the GNP is up 2%. So it's growing at 3.5 times the GNP. Now, that clearly can't last. It's unsustainable. The other thing is traditional media, for all the sexiness of new media and for all the growth, it's 28% of our business. We know that clients are spending about 13 or 14% online. I've seen some projections for this year or next year of 17%. We know that consumers spend 20, 30% of their time online, therefore there's a natural gravitational pull to that.
Yeah.
But for all that, the standouts in this first 8 months have been America and traditional advertising. Now that's a little bit to do about the dead cat bounce, because clearly we're going through that, because you look at from whence we came last year, which was very tough last year, a brutal year. It's a little to do with, if the government stimulates the world economy and the American economy to the extent that they did, it's natural that you get this growth. Again, look from where we come. Some categories have come back that last year almost didn't exist. So we've got car wars going on, auto wars coming on. We've got financial services coming back. We've got retail coming back. So these are categories that were very important to spot markets and free-to-air markets, and they've come back with a vengeance. We could argue whether that's going to last or not. So the irony, a lot of surplus inventory last year, cut in prices, procurement driving people in reviews to look at these opportunities. So the irony is, as I say, or paradox, is that those parts come back. I think that is going to be relatively short-lived, and that what you have to look for growth, our clients and ourselves, what you have to look for growth is the markets that we've just mentioned.
And what are just going on to this like rebound, as you say, what are the media buying consequences of these prices firming up, given the guarantees that were made last year when all the
guarantees by agencies?
Yeah.
They're tough stuff. I mean, you've got V-shaped markets in some markets. You've got guarantees being made, and it's going to be very, very painful. And it has already proven to be quite painful. I do.
Who takes the hit? The holding company or the media owners?
Well, no. I think it's the meat and the sandwich between the clients and the media owners is the agency. But if your agency is on the brink of being sold, or if you've got somebody sitting on like a parrot on your shoulder with a large percentage of it, you're probably more liable to make guarantees than if not. If you don't have market share, right, which is another point, you make the guarantees. You manage your book. I've heard the phrase used in such a way. Whether that's the right thing to do or not from a client point of view, I don't think it is. But that's just our point of view, and we have the luxury, if it is a luxury, of looking at the industry with 65 billion, 70 billion, according to RECMA, it's even more than $80-85 billion book that we can try and manage on a worldwide basis. But I think there have been some casualties already. There have been some missteps. And there will continue to be if people continue to do that. I do think one really serious point about this, and it is a big worry. I mean, if you said to me, what is the thing that I worry about most? It is this emphasis on cost rather than added value. And it's very easy to talk about it in an academic discussion that we should focus on added value and return rather than pure cost. And all the negotiation advice that we get, and we do courses on negotiation with procurement departments in various universities of the world, it's always concentrate on the value added. But there is a very short-term attitude.
You've said in the past, just while we're on touching on the subject of procurement, that occasionally procurement has gone too far. You said that in your recent interim presentation. When has that happened?
We don't. Well, clients want efficiency, effectiveness, and liquidity. The people don't talk about this. I mean, I looked at the 4 hours of half-year statement presentations that we saw on webcasts just like this.
Yeah.
And there was, in each of the three that I looked at, which lasted 4 hours, there were 3 sentences which talked about efficiency and effectiveness in the Q&A, not in the main body of the presentations, in the Q&A. It was almost that somebody had said, well, I think on the grounds of transparency, or because the lawyers had said, you better mention efficiency and effectiveness. There's a third word that's crept into the jargon as well, and that's liquidity. Because ever since Lehman, people, clients, and indeed ourselves have been worried about liquidity. So there's a tremendous focus on efficiency, which is doing things cheaper, more for less. Effectiveness, doing them better, and then liquidity, cash flow. And I think my view is that's too short term. Having said that, the interesting thing, again, about the last 8 months is maybe clients do understand a thing that we've always said, but coming from us, they say they talk their own book. You know, when Deutsche Bank gets up and says, companies, you know, in their 30 consumer staple companies that they've studied, we had our strategy session last week in New York, and we got the guy who did the research work, Jamie Eisenwater, to come in and talk about the work. So 30 consumer staple companies, basically FMCGs, over the last 15 years, had on average, where they invested in brand, in A&P, advertising and promotion, can't distinguish between the two, which is an important distinction, but they can't do it given the data. Those companies that invested consistently over 15 years in A&P grew their sales by 30% more, better compound, and profits, unleveraged profits, so forgetting about debt and the impact on debt, obviously if you have debt and your profits increase, it can increase even more sharply, but profits up by 50%. So 30% sales, 50% profits, unlevered, and the people who cut get an advantage in the sample because they're cutting their costs increasing.
And so in the next 5 years, do you think that dialogue between procurement and marketing and the business functions will become slightly more around value rather than about price?
Well, I hope so. I do worry about the role and value of marketing inside companies and inside the boardroom. I mean, it's sort of a little bit apple pie and motherhood and heavy stuff. But I really think that balance of power, you know, you will not cut your way to prosperity.
Okay.
You'll invest your way. You know, and the classic example at the moment is Apple, right?
Yeah.
Here's a company that innovates and markets relentlessly, driven by a highly prominent and admired individual, but to my mind, it's the proof of the pudding. So,
let's talk about the media owner of the next 5 years.
Yeah.
You've gone on record to say that, you know, of all the media owners that you see and you trade with, that the Murdoch Group, the News Corporation, seems to be the one that understands more about that it's in business, in the communications business, and not necessarily in the newspaper business or the TV business and siloed. Given the rise of the social media, Facebook now, 500 million users around the world, and Google, of course, what do you think the media owner of the next 5 years looks like? Is it totally digital?
Well, it's extremely difficult. I mean, it's a bit, you know, when you have an Omnicom or an IPG or Publicis or WPP, you do have legacy companies, and we don't fell trees and distribute newsprint. But if you fell trees and distribute newsprint, you know, and the alternative is downloading the FT or the Wall Street Journal off an iPad. I mean, that's a much more efficient or effective, I hate the phrase business model, but business model to use. So there are better ways of doing it. There are better mousetraps. And the problem for and I would broaden it from media owners. I think Rupert Murdoch does understand it, maybe because he's a founder. But, you know, you're the same. You know, Philippe Doman came to our strategy session last week, and I think it's fair to say that Viacom and CBS, in its way, I mean, they've split the two up, but in its way, Sumner Redstone also understands that, to be fair, and there are others too. I mean, you could say Bob Iger at Disney, who came to our strategy session a year or so ago, also understands it in a full way. But I think Rupert, maybe because he gets so much ink or digital coverage and everything else, you notice it most. It's the old Theodore Levitt thing. I'm not in the buggy whip business. I'm in the transportation business, and he understands it. Whether it's outdoor in Russia or Star in India or Sky in Turkey or in Germany or Premier in Germany, whatever it happens to be, he gets it. I think in terms of the interrelationship, or Fox Film in the US understands the interlinkage, and I think that's absolutely important. The difficult thing is, and it's trite, is monetizing all this stuff. I mean, the simple fact is that we don't know, how profitable Facebook is. Mark Zuckerberg famously said at one stage, as long as I earn $1 more than my costs, I'm okay. I've heard people say that Facebook will have $2.25 billion of revenues, advertising revenues, in one way, shape, or another next year, which means that it's becoming more and more weighty. Google is $27 billion. We had our review with Google last week. We're spending $1 billion with Google, primarily in search.
And again, that you expect that to grow?
Yes, I do. I mean, I expect it to grow quite violently. I mean, I think the issue for us is up here. It's getting all our people, our 140,000 people, or if I exclude associates, that's companies we own 20 to 49%, 100,000 people, to understand. The issue is, if only everyone knew what the others knew, or we all knew what we know. If I can get, or we can get, every one of those 100,000 people to know what the other 99,999 know, particularly in the areas that you're talking about, learning from, and this applies geographically as well, learning from, we acquired in Beijing 10 days ago a company, a First Moment of Truth company, called DPI Brand Company, which does in-store, a lot of digital stuff, but in-store design, presentation. Now, you would think that the Chinese market was relatively unsophisticated. Wrong. Think again. Distribution is absolutely critical. There are actually about 1.5 billion people in China. There are 184 cities, is it, with more than 1 million people? It's not just tier 1, tier 2. It's not just Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou and Shenzhen. It's Chongqing has 30 million people. So this is about distribution. The key is distribution, right? So understanding these things in a traditional and digital way. So I think the issue really is about knowledge transfer, understanding, not reinventing the wheel too much.
Before I open this up to Matt, I've got sort of one final question really, which sort of is an attempt to bring some of these themes together, these future themes together, which is, if you look at has the market spoken? You have a market, WPP has a market cap of about 8 billion.
About 9 billion.
9 billion. It's gone up by $1
billion. It's about
since we've done this webcast.
Well, it will do, as I've been on the digital box with Charlie Crow. It's bound to go up.
Google, 160 billion. Facebook, analysts already thinking it could be 100 billion, and enormous valuations. If I'm an advertiser, and many of them are watching this webcast, I can embrace globalization by getting a small and cheap creative agency in Latin America to run my creative cheaply. I might take that creative and distribute it straight through a traditional advertising network, which does not necessarily have to be owned or part of.
I could go even one worse. I could do crowdsourcing.
It's that old.
I could do crowdsourcing and procurement of. I've heard that speech before as well.
And you say that you make light of that, but I mean,
I'm not making light of it. It's there. It's there.
So, what do you say about that in terms of protecting a large proportion of the WPP business model?
I think you've got to look at it not as protection, but as expansion. I mean, the moment you start to take a defensive posture, I think you're dead. As long as you take a proactive and aggressive posture and embrace these things, not say I'm going to put walls up or try and ring fence it and prevent, because you're not going to prevent it from happening. It's a bit like Canute and the waves, or it's a bit like any government believing that they can police digital activity or control digital activity. The honest answer is there are no barriers, right? And it's a bit like taxation. Thinking about Woolsey and what they announced yesterday. I mean, the thought that governments today can, through taxation policy, restrict people. I mean, they can't. I mean, human capital is very mobile, and languages are much. People's willingness to travel, adopt languages, speak languages, cultures, willingness to resettle and move around the world. It's a changed world. So you can't do that. The point that you raise, though, is I think, a really important in terms of size. I mean, I think if you look at a Google, what's the Google's biggest challenges? Well, I think probably if Facebook and or Apple are big challenges.
Yes.
Big challenge is size. I mean, moving a $160 billion company, or in the case of Apple, the second most valuable company after ExxonMobil in America at about $220 billion, moving that, it gets more and more difficult. What we have to do, to the heart of your question, is to experiment with different models. The irony about what you just said about, do I have a small agency which does the creative concept and distribution is a much, much bigger opportunity than, that's one campaign at the center. Then you have to distribute it in 106 or 180 or 220 countries. Okay. That's a much more sophisticated, much more challenging, I would argue, actually more interesting task. What gets the pizzazz in M&M magazine or whatever it happens to be is the creative sort of core idea. That then gets changed, manipulated, analysed, adapted in many ways in the other markets. And I think it's often what is crudely called the adaptation is an adaptation. It's a misnomer. Yeah. The other thing, finally, without going to, is specialisation is key. I mean, Mediacom is a wonderful agency because it's specialised in media planning and buying. Do I honestly believe that Mediacom could have flourished inside what we used to call, across the way in Berkeley Square, a full-service agency? I think the answer is no. I'd far rather have specialists, so strong pillars on which you try to build a roof, rather than have a strong roof on weak pillars. And those people who start agencies, the new agents at the start are no different one from the other. They're determined by the people and the quality of the people and the quality of their ideas, not by the concept they try and build around themselves, which at the moment is always, because we have no vested interest, because we have no P&Ls or silos, we can integrate more effectively. I disagree with that. Okay. I think the best people to work on the client issues and opportunities that we have are people who really know what they're talking about. The issue is, how do you bring them together in an integrated whole that delivers the best possible?
Thank you. And
sorry for banging on.
A useful juncture in which to bring in our specialist and quality person, Matthew Mee, head of strategy.
A person of lack of quality.
As opposed to the well, we're moving from the money man to the practitioner. And the practitioner, Matthew, thank you very much for joining this conversation. We've had a range of macro themes, as we suspected we would. Yeah. And what we're now trying to do with the Insider is to now apply some of these macro trends and think about what are brands going to do, what practical strategies do they need to adopt in this rapidly fragmenting, digital, geographically confusing picture, which is increasingly dominated by retailers. So the question is a tough one, but I mean, do you have examples, I guess, from practical examples of how clients that you're working with have navigated these new territories in new, creative and, dare I quote your job title, fresh ways?
I'm going to answer your question, but there's an interesting, in terms of the navigating this rather disruptive, chaotic economic environment, communications environment. I think it was something you were talking about a few moments ago, which I think is quite interesting. I think the really key thing is when you were talking about procurement and about the balance between short-term and long-term, and having the confidence and control over your investments in the short-term. The long-term is one of the kind of big things at the moment. Risk. It feels like risk is more present for clients at the moment than ever before, because of pressures internally in terms of cost, because actually of uncertainty about some of the way that new communication channels pay off. And I guess therefore the biggest kind of danger, in fact, is kind of making very switching from often from businesses that have had very brand investment is a long-term investment. You're kind of looking at an intermediary measure when you're looking at brand health for business that you get paid off in the future. And I think one of the big dangers is actually that you kind of cast that off for some probably very good and accountable short-term bets, but which possibly erode your future profitability.
Do you think that achieving a rating, a certain number of GRPs, is equivalent to achieving a certain number of fans in Facebook or a certain number of downloads on videos in YouTube? I mean, how do you advise clients on the comparing and contrasting those two metrics of marketing success?
The thing about the challenging thing about being somebody who's in charge of a brand now is that you can do whatever you like. You can pretty much do whatever you like. You can create a community, you can make a TV show, you can create a hit song. So now you actually have to be much more mindful of actually what you do want to happen. In a way, the world where Volkswagen could walk into a marketing services company and Mars could walk into a marketing services company, and pretty much the expectation from both would be similar. We're going to make you a product, we're going to put it out there, it's going to create demand and you'll fulfill it further down the line. Well, that just isn't the case anymore. And so I think the pressure is on marketers and the people who work with them is to just be much more mindful. It's not about the channel, it's actually what you want it to do for you. So Facebook as a social media phenomenon, for many businesses it's a service extension phenomenon, not some kind of fan club. It's a way to actually extend a tangible service, as with Twitter. I mean, a fantastic example that you can see with Dell and the use of Twitter and social media as a real tangible extension of their service offer to customers, so a value add.
Do you think over the next 5 years then, using these new social, digital opportunities like Twitter are ultimately, to take the crude calculation we talk about, will take money away from the traditional media channels? I mean, do you see that happening in your client strategies?
Yeah, inevitably. If the cake is this big, there has been a reallocation of budgets. But I think that's actually also because, in fact, there is dawning a much greater clarity in terms of objectives within planning. I think it's completely wrong if you're kind of seeing a token swing towards digital because it feels like it's voguish. I think actually what we're seeing now is much more considered allocation of budgets towards things that create demand, things that service an existing customer base, things that deliver fulfillment, and all of the kind of blurred lines in between. So actually, within communications, all of the tasks and the roles that are held within.
See, this all sounds great.
Yeah.
Many of the advertisers, and thank you, by the way, for posting up your questions. I do see them on this iPad, and I shall be asking some of them, time permitting, in a second. But one question that has actually come through touches upon this point of this media neutrality point. Your business, and this is to both of you, and I guess it's Martin first, please. Much of your business is wedded.
I can't answer it. Matthew's.
Okay, then we'll pass it around.
Hospital pass.
But much of your, one of the questions that came through to me earlier before this session was the agency of the future in the next 5 years. Is it the agent of the media owner or the agent of the client? And I suppose that's a good way of summarising the question, which is if your business model is currently wedded more towards the television markets in many countries.
No, that's fair. I mean, if you looked at there's $14 billion of revenue. If I look at the proportion of our revenue that is dependent on TV, the traditional creative is about $3.25 billion, and the media piece is about $2.25. So let's say it's 5. Of that, a large proportion is non-TV, but I would say no more than 10 or 15% of that is TV generated. So here's a company that doesn't depend. I mean, it's wrong to believe, and that's one issue. The other issue is if clients ask us to do what we think is the best for them, do we always think, do we have the time to think about answering that question? Say you're a client, you ask me that question, I'm sitting here, am I sitting here trying to compute how I can maximize my return? The answer is no. We're trying to do, believe it or not, the best possible job in an increasingly fragmented world. We're trying to do 2 things. One is to decide with the client what's the optimum spend and where it should be spent. And I mentioned advertising and promotion and the difficulty that Deutsche Bank has in breaking down the advertising versus the promotion. Advertising, as they define it, is about brand building. Promotion is about discount and price, right? One packaged goods company, I remember about 5 years ago, had $70 billion of sales, US, 10 billion of profit, spent $2.5 billion above the line, and gave away in price discounts $10.5 billion. So more than its profit it gave away in price discounts to retailers in one way or another. What we're trying to do is maximize the return. So I totally refute the suggestion that we would act in our own interested ways. Now, one other thing, so as far as the media is concerned, we do want to have closer relationships with the media owners because we want to be able to develop content, ideas, programming. We've just launched, MediaCom. in China has launched China's Got Talent, and the audience is 500 million people in China. I was in Beijing, as I said, about 10 days ago, and they're absolutely thrilled with the response they've got from 500 million consumers in China who are, absorbed with the power of a programming idea like China's Got Talent for Procter & Gamble. So I think there are really very big opportunities for us to work with clients and media owners, and I'm a little bit disgruntled at the suggestion that our people work in some sort of self-interested way. We are media neutral. We do not depend on free-to-air television to the extent we did before, or to I would say less than 10 or 15% of our revenues.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin.
Sorry.
So, there it is, the diktat from the holding company.
There's no diktat.
Well,
it's just
the
permission, interpretation.
Media, we are truly in a media neutral age, and that is the reality of the current situation, and will continue to be for the next 5 years.
Absolutely, and I think the you were talking about the kind of sort of protectionist attitude towards people kind of going and doing their own thing. Well, again, I think you can see an expansion of opportunities practically every week that a company like ours can move into. So it's I don't really.
How do you think in terms of media? And sorry, Matt, we're running close to time. I want to try and get some of the questions that have been come through to expressed into this forum. What do you think the digital landscape will look like in 5 years' time?
You want some nice, big, chunky.
Yes.
So I do think Facebook is. I think Facebook is interesting because I think Facebook has already kind of won a Darwinian battle against MySpace. And done it in a way that kind of transcends the normal terms of social media. So it's gathered lots of things to itself, like burrs. It's a great kind of connective engine, and you stick search on that, and you've got something that is
the only thing
very, very powerful.
Is there's two people in a shed in a garage in Beijing or Shanghai or Bangalore or Sao Paulo, which is a big centre now, who have come up with an idea that in 5 years' time, if we have the opportunity again of sitting down with Charlie Crow on the Insider, we will say, "Gosh, I wish we knew about that."
Should you be that lucky, Sir Martin,
to be sitting here on the Insider with you in 5 years' time?
One question: if we look ahead to 5 years, you dare I say you're at the age you will be in 5 years' time?
Oh, please God,
70.
Well, you're really wounding now, Charlie.
It's not the question that you're expecting, but it's about the fact that a number of the other holding company bosses are mature in their roles. They're titans of the marketing communications industry, of which you are one. When the time
mature but not senile, is that what you're trying to say?
Yes. When the time comes for succession to be planned and to move on,
we plan succession all the time.
What do you think the future of the marketing comms holding company is?
It's a very interesting question. I'm bound to be slightly different. I'm peculiar, and I'm bound to be slightly different because I started WPP with one other person in a room about this size 25 years ago. None of the other three heads, to my recollection, started the business from scratch. One came in as a non-executive director, one was in part of the triumvirate and the Big Bang, and another one was working started off in information technology, working for the founder. I think, therefore, my attitude tends to be slightly different. I mean, this is, it's very personal. I've compared it to Will Shankly and his famous quote about football not being a matter of life and death. It's more important than that. So I think it's slightly different. No, listen, I think those, whether it's WPP or the other parent companies, or holding companies, have to adapt and change. We have no choice. I mean, the advantage that we have, the thing, we're sitting here on Berkeley Square. I always remember when I was at Saatchi's. I remember Maurice Saatchi trying to hire Jeremy Bullmore as chairman of Saatchi in London. Now, why did he? I thought that was brilliant. I was with Maurice at the time. Maurice failed. His usual charm, all pervasive charm, failed on Jeremy. But what was he trying to do? He was trying to do two things. He was trying to be the sort of, I'm going to say the aristocrat of the industry, and that's the wrong way of putting it, but the establishment of the industry, the legacy, the strength of the industry, and have the hot shop or the pizzazz or the sexiness. So the Saatchi boutique plus the strength of JWT. The analogy, I think, is a good one, that you want to have the strength of the traditional media and the traditional approach, and you want to have the strength of the new. So you want to have the old and the new. Look what's happened in the last 8 months. People would have shot television in the head. Wrong, right? So you want to do both. The cake is expanding. Remember that with the exception of last year, our industry has seen continuous expansion. Remember, it's $1 trillion industry, that 500 billion is in traditional media and 500 billion is outside. It's a big industry, it's fun, it's interesting, it's an art as well as being a science. Technology is becoming more important, data is becoming more important. It's really very exciting. Those holding companies, those are going to change. If they don't change, they'll have problems. They're going to have to change and have to absorb. We do strategic thinking, creative execution, and distribution. That's what we used to do. We still do those things. We do the application of technology through 24/7 Real Media, through Zig, through MIG, through our B3 platforms, through Zap. We do all these things, application of technology and the manipulation and analysis of data. Critically important. $4 billion of revenue comes from data.
Okay, thank you. And Matt, final point to you. We have a number of very senior advertisers firing in questions and watching us right now. What are your key pieces of advice to them to avoid being surprised in 5 years' time?
There are lots and lots of pieces of advice. Apart from going back to the other one, watch your long-term bets as well as your short-term. Of course, you should have positive return in the short term, but look how you're looking after your long-term equity and health. I think the other thing is watch what happens with your reputation online over the next 5 years. So don't be taken by surprise. I think just last weekend we've seen a TripAdvisor being litigated against by angry B&B owners. Explode that out to a massive global corporate scale. I think the next 5 years, management of your reputation online could be a very big issue. So be prepared for that.
And that is a fascinating issue, which we unfortunately have not got time to delve into here. That is a shame. I hope you've enjoyed the inaugural Insider webcast from MediaCom. I've been told that there's questions can be posted up onto the website. The MediaCom team will answer them, and there is going to be a white paper produced off the back of some of these themes and some of the analysis that the team are looking into now, and that will be soon available for you. And for those of you who have registered, I'm sure MediaCom will be in touch to see if you're interested in reading more. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed a stimulating 50 minutes. I hope MediaCom can afford the. I hope the MediaCom can afford the web capacity, the bandwidth. That we've gone a little bit over budget, but I do apologise. But sorry about that, Sir Martin. The expenses will be in the post. It's for me.
It's a job for you, Charlie. You become the Charlie
Stop
the Charlie Rose of digital.
It's all descending into chaos now. We're going to the pub in Berkeley Square, and it's been a joy, hasn't it? It's been good fun. Thank you very much to Sir Martin Sorrell, Chief Executive WPP, Matthew Mee, Head of Strategy at MediaCom EMEA, and from me, Charlie Crowe, Chief Executive of C Squared. That's the lot. Thank you very much.